Welcome to This Explainer. We are diving into a fascinating recent broadcast from Sky News Australia today, and it dissects what they view as the absolute hypocrisy of politicians, royals, and celebrities. You know, the media is constantly feeding us stories about the upper echelon, but what actually happens when their actions completely contradict their carefully crafted public personas? Well, we're going to break down the source material's arguments to see exactly how this so-called elite disconnect plays out in real time. It's a structured look at power, wealth, and the completely different rules the establishment seems to play by.
Okay, let's take a quick look at the agenda. We'll be moving systematically through four key areas highlighted in the broadcast. First, politicians and royals, then diplomatic traps, moving on to wealth and class, and finally, celebrity rules. Let's just jump right in.
Section 1. Politicians, royals, and hypocrisy.
So, right off the bat, to frame their argument about political behavior, the commentators take aim at New York City politician Zohran Mamdani, and they use this great, very specific term to describe him: champagne socialist. You've probably heard it before, right? By applying this definition, someone who loudly champions socialist ideals while living pretty comfortably within the exact same system they critique, the broadcast sets up a direct challenge to his authenticity. They're essentially telling the audience, hey, don't just pay attention to what this guy says, watch what he actually does.
And wow, do the hosts have a perfect contrast to illustrate this point. On the left, we've got the talk. Before meeting King Charles, Mamdani publicly stated that if he had the chance, he'd encourage the king to return the controversial Koh-i-Noor diamond. It's tough, anti-establishment rhetoric. But then, look at the right, the action. When King Charles and the Queen actually visited the World Trade Center site in New York, the broadcaster points out that Mamdani was perfectly compliant. He didn't ask his tough question, he behaved entirely respectfully. The hosts actually joked that the very same guy from the No Kings rally was practically on his knees for a literal king. It is presented as a classic case study in political theater versus reality.
Moving right along to Section 2, Diplomatic Traps and Revenge.
Stepping away from local politicians, the source frames high-level diplomacy as this incredibly calculated game of retaliation. The commentators map out a fascinating timeline regarding Donald Trump and King Charles. So Event 1. King Charles delivers a speech to Congress. The hosts describe it as heavily left-leaning, noting his positions on climate change and some subtle swipes at the Trump administration. Then comes Event 2, the trap. During a state banquet, President Trump publicly claims that King Charles agrees with him that Iran absolutely should not have a nuclear weapon. Boom. Event 3, the result. The commentators argue Charles was completely cornered here. I mean, the King of England cannot publicly come out and support a nuclear Iran, right? The broadcast argues this was a totally intentional move by Trump to force the king into a box as payback for that earlier speech.
The really crucial point is how the palace responded to all this. Their official statement noted that the king is, quote, naturally mindful of his government's long-standing and well-known position on the prevention of nuclear proliferation. The commentators just completely dissect this statement. They interpret it as an absolute victory for Donald Trump. They argue Buckingham Palace was forced to issue a statement that essentially translates to a very polite yes, proving that, hey, even royals aren't immune to a well-laid political trap.
All right, up next is Section 3, Wealth, Class, and Corporate Control. Shifting gears from diplomatic power to judgments about wealth, the broadcast zeroes in on a controversy surrounding Jennifer Hegseth, that's Pete Hegseth's wife, and her attire for the White House Correspondents' Dinner. On the left, we have the dress she chose to wear. It cost $42. It's accessible, normal, and very inexpensive. On the right, we have her critic, Ella DeVee, who the source actually labels a socialist socialite. DeVee attacked Hegseth for not wearing something far more expensive. The hosts used this whole incident to argue a much broader point. These elite critics are entirely out of touch with normal people. They highlight the wild irony of complaining about privilege on the one hand, while simultaneously bashing a mother of four for wearing an affordable dress. They present this as a really strange double standard where the elite basically demand a performance of wealth. From personal wealth and fashion, the broadcast jumps straight into corporate dominance, and they highlight this striking detail from a SpaceX IPO filing obtained by Reuters. The takeaway is just absolute. No one can fire Elon Musk from his role as chief executive and chairman of the board without his consent. Let that sink in. That is ironclad control. In the normal corporate world, boards usually have the power to oust a CEO if things go wrong, but here the broadcast notes that standard rules simply do not apply.
So why is this accepted? Well, the commentators break down the justification for this unprecedented level of control. Beyond him just holding the top roles simultaneously, the key takeaway from the broadcast is that investors aren't just betting on rockets, they're betting directly on the individual. The hosts argue that this kind of dictatorial control only works when the person's name itself is the primary corporate asset. Elon Musk literally is SpaceX. So the elite rules of corporate governance are bent entirely out of shape because his personal brand is what holds all the value.
And that brings us to our final section, Section 4, Celebrity Rules and Culture.
Finally, the broadcast explores how the Hollywood elite operate by completely different social boundaries. It's like untangling a web. Okay, so Zoe Kravitz is reportedly engaged to pop star Harry Styles. But Zoe is best friends with Taylor Swift, and Harry Styles is Taylor Swift's very famous ex-boyfriend. The broadcast then throws in another wild example. Kim Kardashian reportedly dating Lewis Hamilton, who previously dated one of her sisters. The commentators highlight these overlapping dating circles to make a specific point. In the celebrity world, normal human boundaries just don't seem to exist. In everyday life, you probably wouldn't date your absolute best friend's ex or your sister's ex, right? But the hosts argue that elite social circles operate under totally different rules, where these boundaries are just routinely ignored.
The broadcast then makes a sharp pivot to Hollywood's influence on culture, specifically looking at actor Elliot, who is co-producing a documentary called Second Nature. Reportedly, the film explores same-sex relationships and gender fluidity within the animal kingdom. The commentators push back hard on this. They ask a very pointed question: why do younger children need access to this kind of information? The source explicitly challenges the intent behind sharing these concepts with a younger demographic, arguing that it creates confusion rather than clarity. For the hosts, it further illustrates what they see as a vast disconnect between Hollywood's priorities and the comfort levels of everyday people.
To wrap up this explainer, we really have to pull back and look at the big picture presented by the source. From politicians bowing to kings, to billionaires completely rewriting corporate law, to celebrities ignoring everyday social boundaries, the media constantly spotlights these elite contradictions. But here is the provocative question I want to leave you with today, based on our analysis. Why are we all so captivated by the hypocrisy of the establishment? Does exposing their double standards actually change the system, or does it just become another form of entertainment for the rest of us? Really makes you think, doesn't it? Thank you so much for walking through this structured analysis with me, and remember, always keep questioning the information you see out there.